Hello, everyone. That's all right. Come on, make some noise. We're live tonight. We're live, right? Anyway, I have a question for you. I'd like you to consider. How many of you have met a deaf person before? Not me. Okay, about half. How many can you imagine being deaf in this world? A lot of you maybe can't imagine that because we are hearing in a hearing world. I remember being able to hear. I was born just like you. I remember in the morning hearing birds chirp, the waves, the ocean, rain, birds, chickens, and cows, all these animal farms, very just different animals, music as well. And life was beautiful, and it continues to be beautiful. I went to school, and I would sing and dance, and that was until I was about 10 years old. I remember being in the classroom in 4th grade, and we really suffered for about 3 months. We had no teacher. Then finally, we were supposed to have a teacher that day, and we were all so excited to learn. But for me, my body and energy, it was just decreasing. I also had a fever. I was dizzy and I couldn't focus. So we decided that I would go home, and I was helped to be carried off to my home. My grandparents, they took me with their bicycle, or had my dad come with his bicycle. So he rode his bicycle over, and my parents, they brought me home. I remember that was a Thursday night. Friday morning, well, earlier that night, I was asleep, and I woke up. My ears were ringing. I couldn't hear anything. I yelled out to my mom, "Mom, I can't hear." She told me it's fine. We'll go to the doctor tomorrow, so go back to sleep. I thought, fine. So I went back to sleep, and Friday morning, I couldn't hear anything still. It was just getting worse and worse. So my father decided to put me on the back of his favorite bicycle. We would ride together. We decided to go to a close health clinic. There weren't many hospitals nearby or many resources at all. We lived in a pretty impoverished country, no ambulances, so we used what we could to get around. So the nurse looked at me, gave me fever medication. She said, "You'll be fine." I went back home. Saturday and Sunday, I really emphasized in the morning that my body felt cold in the bath and I couldn't stand, and I couldn't use my bicycle. So we had two options, really. So what was my family going to do? They decided to bring me on this stretcher, makeshift stretcher. 4 people would carry me as I laid there on this makeshift stretcher, and they would take me to the health clinic. And the nurse looked at me and was very straightforward with my parents. Said, "He's gonna die. I have no time for dead people. Take him home, go bury him." My parents thought, wow, well, we respect the diagnosis, but my parents refused to bring me home to die. And then later, about 5 or 6 years, I asked my mom, "I don't understand how I became deaf." My mother said, "You were dead. The doctor said you were going to die." And I said, "Why not have a funeral, bury me, and be done?" My mom said, "No. You couldn't eat. You could barely breathe. You could barely feel things, but your heart still was beating. And now, I'm alive. And I'm deaf." I became deaf. And the dictionary describes deaf as someone who cannot hear or has a degree of hearing loss. And I understand that concept, but for me, that doesn't apply. And that doesn't apply to anyone who identifies as deaf. I understand that concept was probably invented for someone like me, but when I became deaf, I found a new life. I transitioned into a whole new part of my life and found meaning. And I can't hear, but I believe that I've gained even more than I have before in my life. Also, I survived more challenging things and overcame things that I couldn't have had I been hearing. Back to my story, though. When I'd become deaf, my family, they were thinking about what to do, the options they had to do with me. And there wasn't much advice or counseling that was provided. For their son, they thought it was kind of the end of their life. That's what the doctor had said. And they had a lot of questions about how to apply for my education. And I had thought about my sister-in-law sent a letter to my father. And in the letter, he read it, and it mentioned about a school for the deaf and suggested that he bring his son to there, or me. How many of your parents would empower you at age 12 or 13 years old to make a decision that impactful for your life? How many of you? Not many. And with that, it's a very dangerous kind of concept because you're that young. But my parents allowed me to make that decision. And I said, yes, I want to go. So we planned and I moved for the new school. My father and I both got on his bicycle and we rode. It was kind of like Switzerland because it was very mountainous. So we were on the bike riding up and down the hills, me and my father, pedaling along. So it was about 6 hours from home, and then when we arrived to the city, it had been about a 13-hour long altogether journey. And it was the best bike ride I had taken up until then, my whole life. I didn't know, though, that when we arrived there, the name of the school, I remember it was a Monday morning. We sat down and we were writing on paper. That's how my father communicated with me. And he gestured to me and said, "You're going to start school tomorrow, and I believe you will become successful. I will pick you up around Christmas time." That Christmas never happened. My dad never came for me. About 1 month later, he was killed. Not just him, my parents, my grandparents, cousins, friends, people I had known were all killed in this genocide of 1993. But, it was the 21st. They were all killed. And for me, every one of those people had thought I'd become successful. Today, I stand before you. Today, I was also in that picture. It was about 2010 at Qualcomm Stadium, for a football stadium, to honor the king of the university and to honor also a lot of people who were successful at the college. And we all were arrived there dressed all nicely. And you see me standing there in the line with many people who were very honorable, deans of schools and the Marines. There was a lot of people who were very successful for many years who were in that picture. And they became even presidents of things. And I thought, wow. And I'm the first deaf person from there. The school incorporated ASL. They continued to use ASL in that community. And that fall in the program. I wish that my parents could have gotten to see me sign. For my dad, who wanted me to be successful, I think that would be very impactful. I have a responsibility to start everything. I have to start my bicycle for other deaf people around the world. I want to give them the same experience that my father gave to me. Again, I stand before you and I am deaf. I am alive and I'm proud. I can't hear anything, but I feel everything. And in my everyday life, I function just fine. You may think that it might be hard for me, but I do teach things like dance. And I do this all the time. And it's more that we focus on the internal part of ourselves that's important. For all of you, that's important too. But now I want to talk about with you my focus in life, about kind of the metaphor of bicycle for planning around, traveling around the world and having fathers like mine who maybe don't have, I want to be like a father, a supporter for people who maybe didn't have fathers like mine. And that, I know I can't help everyone, but with ASL and support, I believe we can get there. I believe in traveling more. In our world, society and the system paints a picture of how we should be and that we are different. But why not express yourself more? And why label me, or why spend $50,000 on my little ear for something like a cochlear implant, like when I was a child? And the world expresses they're willing to pay $50,000 to get a cochlear implant and make me become hearing. And around the world, people have, if they gave $500 to deaf education, we would have a lot of new schools and enough schools, just $500 compared to $50,000. If we reverse the perspective of fixing deafness and accept it for being a language and just a part of life, then most of the Health World Organization makes clear that there's about 360 or more million deaf people around the world, and about 80% struggle with hearing loss. And the World Federation for the Deaf did some research. About 70% of people in the world communicate with sign language who are deaf. Now, out of those lists, 80% live in impoverished countries. And the worst part is 73 out of that 80%. So again, 80%, 73 of the 80% have no access to education. And only 3% have access to bilingual education. Now, what about the other 3% that do have the bilingual education? Only 3%. Can you imagine if 90% of the world had no communication access and education, but they were expected to learn and read, write English and express themselves in sign language and not have access? So how do we change that? I believe we all can. And I want to. I believe we really can. What's important of tonight, my discussion, is about my experience traveling and meeting people. I believe that all the people have an internal strength and expression or voice. A voice inside of us. We all have it. To focus on what's best for us and for other people. And I know that if you think you can, you might be a little hesitant, being more focused can help with your hearing. And it starts one community at a time to help raise awareness for deaf culture. And we see that. But we continue with life. If we were all that's left internally, our voice, one thing we feel with life. Today, my belief is about my focus and my internal voice, but also a focus about expression and support for my brothers and sisters around the world who are deaf. And deaf is not something that should be looked at as the person is gone. It's not a disability. We are not different. We're not different. We function just fine. And we express ourselves with sign and facial expressions. And we're not hearing music the way you do, okay? But we feel the vibrations. And I feel a strong belief in that tonight, that we all can focus on our inner expression, our inner voice. And with that, it will open a lot of opportunities to become more skilled. And you need to focus on exploring more in depth the connections that we have and make sure that we are successful and realize that we are all connected and skilled. I believe that you can help me and join me and bridge the world in one community at a time. Thank you.